नाना का कलमा पढ़ के नवासे कुमारा, नाना का कलमा पढ़ के नवासे कुमारा।
Salawat. Allahumma salli. Please recite a Surah Fatiha for the families of Mr. and Mrs. Imtiaz Muswi. They are the sponsors of tonight's program. And also Misbah Bhai, sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Imtiaz Muswi and also Mr. and Mrs. Misbah Zaidi. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد ولم يكن له بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولم يكن له بسم الله صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى. Also there is a request for dua for the sehat of a few very important individuals who are part of our community. One is Brother Salam, and also Maulana Sayyid Tilmiz Hassan Rizvi and others who are in need of our dua. Let's please recite 5 times Amma Yujib. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma Yujibul Mustarra Iza Dua wa Yakshifu Su'u. Amma Yujibul Mustarra Iza Dua wa Yakshifu Su'u. Amma Yujibul Mustarra Iza Dua wa Yakshifu Su'u. Amma Yujibul Mustarra Iza Dua ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء ويجعلكم خلفاء الأرض إلها مع الله خليلا ما تذكرون. صلوات. Inshallah, our program of Majalis will continue next weekend. Today is the last Majlis by Maulana Sheikh Bilal at this center, and may Allah give him a long life and also give him plenty of knowledge, inshallah. Our youth and all of us have benefited a lot from his two majalis, and of course we'll do it tonight, inshallah. And with a loud salawat, we'll request him once again to come this year for one more weekend to Baitul Khaim, inshallah. I want him to continue his topic of Tazkiyah Nafs. It's really has very good reception. Everybody tends to like it. Maulana, please do give us a chance to hear you out once again, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Next weekend's program will start on Friday, Saturday and Sunday once again immediately after Maghribain. Maulana Nafis Takhawi from Atlanta will be with us next weekend, inshallah. I think we have one more. After that, we'll start the Arba'in series of Majalis, inshallah, after next weekend. With a loud salawat, let's welcome her onto the member, please. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. MashaAllah. Thank you very much. Bismillah.
Surah Al-Fatiha. One more Surah Fatiha for the marhumin of today's, of the family of the sponsors of today's majlis. There's a request for khususan to remember Sayyid Askari Hussain Zaki Muswi, Sayyid Vikar Hussain Muswi, Sayyid Baqir Hussain Muswi, Aliya Khatoon, Ali Hasnain, Badrul Hassan Zaidi, Qibla Ali Naqi Naqwi, and all of our marhumin. Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat to hasten the master of our time, Sahibul Asri wa Zaman. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المسائب Ali Muhammad. May Allah increase in our reward for commemorating the difficulties of Ali Muhammad. Alhamdulillah, it's been an honor to be able to spend this time with you guys and to discuss these topics. And sometimes you prepare something and Allah brings you somewhere else. And my initial intention was there's a discussion that I've been researching and learning about where talking about what I call Asrar Karbala. And may Allah give us tawfiq, talking about certain concepts that though the waqi' of Karbala is present before us, there are certain lessons that are in the depth of this event that without pondering over what it was that was intended for us to achieve, we may miss them. So it's not that anyone has hidden something in the event of Karbala. The event of Karbala is in front of us. And after 1400 years, we know of what happened. But there are certain points of significance that when we understand the why certain actions took place they did, we learn how we should approach and how we should have a depth of understanding of the event of Karbala. When we see, for example, the narration that comes from our sixth Imam, Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. This is also similar narrations from our Prophet where they say that inna لقتل جدي الحسين حرارة في قلوب المؤمنين لن تبرد أبدا. That certainly for the killing of my grandfather Hussein in the hearts of the believers is a fire that never goes out. Our topic at hand where we've been talking about Tazkiyatun Nafs, the goal this weekend, honestly, because this subject is such that for over 1,000 years now, ulama have been writing about the topic of understanding the spirit and how to establish a relationship, how to control, how to manifest, how to work with your spirit. That, alhamdulillah, in 3 nights we may talk about many things, but we're definitely not going to talk about the details of the science of it. This is the idea that through this conversation, the primary goal is to have ihsas, to have a understanding that this exists. What am I going through? Who am I as a person? There's the statement of the Ahlul Bayt where they say the silence of the mu'min is greater than the speech of anyone else. The understanding of that is that when a mu'min is silent, when a believer is silent, he's pondering, he's thinking, he's assessing, he's becoming aware of himself. And then to spend that time and to go into tafakkuh, where I am thinking and I'm actively using my mind, that this 1 hour of tafakkuh and thoughtfulness over this religion of Islam and who I am as a person and where I'm going is better in narrations than 70 years of worship of a worshipper. 1 hour of thinking, understanding what I'm trying to do here, understanding what it is that Allah wants from me. How do I attain the pleasure of Allah? Is my life moving towards Allah? Am I applying the things that I have learned about Ahlul Bayt? Am I thinking about the Ahlul Bayt in my day-to-day life? Am I prioritizing my actions? Or am I simply reacting to my environment as it puts a different stimulus in front of me, one after another after another? This process of thoughtfulness begins with the idea of acknowledgement, of ihsas, of understanding that something exists within me, something is motivating me. And that's the goal, that we come to this understanding, first and foremost, that something exists within me. And there are a few different ways of doing this, and there's nothing wrong with finding multiple ways to go down this path of understanding that I exist, I am present, and I operate. In the material realm, looking at it simply in a material world, when we look at an individual's identity, we see that an identity of a person is something either they choose to manifest or society tells you what you are. Either I choose and I say this is who I am, or my environment will make me someone. There are very practical examples of this. I'll give you guys, you guys are good? We're good? Allah Salli ala Muhammad wa ali. Ya Ali. That'll keep everybody awake. When we look at societies, at times society tells us who we are. Society tells us we're an American. How? The holidays in America are something we commemorate, celebrate. Our environment dictates to us how we observe this day. That if a third person was supposed to take a look at us and they see the 4th of July, they would see us barbecuing, spending time with people, they would see us taking time off from work. Our behavior and our habit would suddenly break on this day, which would tell a person who's looking at me to look at me and say that this is a day of significance to this individual. This is my society dictating my priority. This is my society building my identity. The same way, for example, when the 25th of December comes. Society dictates my behavior that what? I don't go to work that day, I spend it with my family, I spend it in a casual, relaxed environment. There's no problem with this. That at times, society dictates my values, and by looking at me and my behavior, you determine and you say, okay, this is an American. If we lived in a Shia environment and we lived in a Shia country, we would say that from the environment one could look at us and make the determination, this is a Shia. But in this culture and this environment, there are some of my attributes that my society is dictating to me. The 4th of July, 25th of December, no problem. It's okay. We don't have to fight the system. But we don't have to become the system. What does that mean? That means that, okay, my culture, which I live in, there's no harm in me participating with the culture, no problem. But it should not force me to compromise my identity as a Muslim. I don't compromise my identity as a Shia Muslim. And what that means is that while society dictates to me that certain days are important, I show to society from my behavior that certain days are important to me. Where? When, for example, the holy nights of Ramadan come to us, Layal al-Qadr. Is work going to tell me that work is more important? Or am I going to tell work that no, this is more important? When, for example, the day of Ashura comes, do we say, I am majboor, I am forced, I have to go to work? Or do we say to work, no, this day takes priority in my life over anything else that you have as an obligation for me? In this way, it's important that fine, I can accept an identity as an American, no problem. It's okay. I live in America, to have the representation of the culture that I live in is okay. But not at the cost that I cannot be seen anymore as a follower of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Even this is a very material aspect of learning and understanding that I have an identity, I have a self, I have a purpose. That going through this action of making the determination that some things are more important to me than what my environment believes is one of the things that I can use to develop my identity, myself, my nafs, to know that there is something more important that I have to achieve with my life than simply going to work and celebrating the 4th of July and celebrating Halloween and fulan and fulan and fulan, and I'm not lost in the system. I didn't become a part of the system. I can exist here. There's no problem with living in this country. But I have to make sure that I preserve my identity so that my nafs doesn't become the one that overtakes me. For our children, for our next generations, this is very important. They're going to learn. The first place that they learn is at the knee of the elders who are sitting here.
We set the precedent of what's okay. What are we allowed to do? And then it needs reinforcement, it needs effort, it needs work to make sure that my children, my next generation, don't see my identity lost in society. That they know that we are different and we behave differently and we live differently. Which is why in this effort of preserving this nafs and this self and this identity is the statements of, for example, Sayyid Sistani, who whenever people come from America to visit him, may Allah protect and elong his life, he makes the statement, he says, teach your children your mother tongues. Speak them at home. Ensure that your children understand that they are not like everyone else. This concept of understanding you're not like everyone else is a big, big responsibility to know that I can't do what everybody else does. I have other priorities and responsibilities. This is a very material look at the idea of the simple preservation of the self. This is the start of the preservation of the self. When I want to look at, for example, developing now that I understand that I have priorities that I dictate, I have a personality that I'm responsible for, now we can go out and say that now I want to change my behavior, I want to reflect in my characteristics those attributes that I have been told are the representation of my faith or that I agree are the representation of my faith. This is where we start taking the idea that, okay, I acknowledge my soul has faculties within it. I acknowledge that within my soul is the ability to be angry, is the ability to seek pleasure, is the ability to use my intellect, is the ability to have an imagination, and I start to give them nidam and order. And I start to think about, how do I want to be known? How do I want to use these attributes that are present within me? And we begin the process of control, and we begin the process of the development of these attributes. When we start taking a look at a person who is developing these attributes, and inshallah, may Allah give us tawfiq, we'll talk about how each of these attributes has a scale and what are the sicknesses and diseases. This is one entire discussion that inshallah, if we have time tonight, we'll get to it. Otherwise, we'll start talking about the idea of one who wants to control his nafs. And that control of that nafs begins with starting with understanding how Allah has described that nafs, that when you begin with this nafs, it begins as if it's an animal. And you are the one who has the ability and the freedom to go out and to change this nafs and to improve it. And it begins with, Allah describes that there's at least 3 stages. You mentioned Maulana Talmiz, he has educated me of a 4th stage as well, that the soul goes through in the development. The first of these stages, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Is where Allah describes, Inna nafsa la'ammaratam bis-su', that certainly your soul is something that is overwhelmingly commands a person towards evil. Nafs al-ammara. Nafs al-ammara is when I begin to acknowledge that my soul is running rampant in me. It only chases the desires that exist within it. It only chases that whatever it desires, I chase after it. If it wants to be angry, I let it be angry. If it wants to be happy, I let it be happy. I just do whatever I feel like. And we've heard this in our culture as well, promoting this concept, and which is why we don't follow the culture. Do what makes you happy. And the one I really don't like, the YOLO, right? You only live whatever you want. You only have one life, enjoy it. This is that nafs al-ammara, that looks at nothing and no consequence and no long-term decision about what's good for you, what's bad for you. This is that nafs that is like a wild animal. Our ulama go further and say that this wild animal has 3 phases that you can look at it in. The first of these 3 phases of this nafs al-ammara is that nafs al-bahimiyya. Nafs al-bahimiyya is literally an animal. It's just, there's nothing different between you and an animal. The same way an animal changes and reacts to its environment, sees something it wants, it takes it, hates something, it yells at it, does whatever it wants to. This is that example that your nafs has no control over it, nothing over it. As you acknowledge this and you start developing, then you come into what's called nafs as-sabawiyya. That this nafs as-sabawiyya is that nafs which, in general, you have an idea, you can stop yourself, you have some self-control, you have some ability, but when you become angry or emotional, nothing can stop you. This is that nafs that has completely run wild in a person. Can do anything, has no regard for anyone. And if we're not careful, it turns into the third type of nafs al-ammara, which is nafs al-shaytaniyya. This is that nafs that not only runs wild, but takes pleasure in causing pain and committing sin. This is that person who's lost such track of reality that sin starts to look good to them, and there's no satisfaction in life unless if I'm stealing candy from babies and kicking old people and na'uzubillah, all these horrible things that you can do. I say, what's the pleasure in life? Once I acknowledge that this exists within me, I have the process of correcting and building. And we'll talk about a good exercise process by which we build and we correct all of this as we go through it. As I continue, myself grows and I start to become and acknowledge if I work on myself, and I grow to the point where Allah is this one who says, La uqsimu binafsil lawwama, that I swear by the self-reproaching soul. That man, as his consciousness grows and his awareness of his self grows, and he starts to realize, I can't do anything and everything I desire all the time. I need to have some control on myself. There are consequences to my actions. I need to change my behavior. I need to become a better person. I need to have more control over this process. Allah now says, I swear by that soul that reproaches itself, that works on itself, that thinks about the consequences of its actions. It feels guilt when it makes a mistake. It feels happy when it does something good. Majority of humanity, by the nature of the rules of society, reaches to this level of nafs al-lawwama. That, for example, most of the people that we know in society that aren't, for example, na'uzubillah, people who are like, serial killers or psychopaths and do crazy things, reach to the level that they have some level of self-control. And majority of us reach this level that yes, we do good, we do bad. Sometimes we feel good about the things that we're accomplishing. Sometimes we feel sad about the things that we're doing. Sometimes we try to reproach ourselves and we say that, oh, there's a better way I should have behaved. Next time I'll try to change my behavior. I'll try to do better. And we exist between this phase of growing and changing, and sometimes we're good, sometimes we're bad. Now somebody say, Sheikh, now what's wrong with that? At least we accomplished something. At least we're not animals anymore. But the truth of the fear of this state is what if you die in a state of disobedience? What if I die and in that day, the last action that I perform is something that's sinful? Yes, I was doing good things from time to time, but the last action that I perform or the last deed that I perform is one that leads me away from Allah. There are many examples where, and they're given to us in narrations and hadith and stories with morality and good guidance that describe the idea that always keep goodness in your mind and have husn al-dhan of others and husn al-dhan of the desire that you want to perform. What you want to do with your life. Think good things, don't think bad things. Think positive thoughts of where you want to be. Have hope in the mercy of Allah that you will do good and move in the right direction. There's, for example, a famous story that we teach our children to teach them to do good, that there were two brothers. One who was a very sinful man but very wealthy, and his brother who was a very pious man but very poor. And that eventually this very poor, pious brother, he wound up in a state of extreme difficulty, and he went to go stay with his brother. When he stayed with his brother, he kept up his prayers, doing his responsibilities, performing all of his good actions, and his brother kept up all of his sins. And one day it happened that this pious brother, he started thinking, what has all my faith and piety gotten me? I'm so poor and I'm in such an inconvenient state, I can't even take care of myself, I have to rely on my brother. And look at my brother. He's enjoyed his life, and look how successful he's become and how big his house is, and he has resources and he was able to help me in an instant. What did my faith get me? And thinking this, he decides, I'm going to go talk to my brother and I'm going to join him and I'm going to leave this path of mine. At the same time, the other brother, the sinful brother in his room is sitting and thinking, he says, look how self-loathsome I am. I hate myself. I'm so disappointed in my behavior. Look at the morality of my brother. If I could be like him, I would leave all of this behind if I just had the dignity my brother has, the spirituality my brother has, the peace my brother has. And he makes the intention that I'm going to go see my brother and I'm going to tell him I'll leave all of this behind and I'm going to become like you. And in the moment that they're coming up, one comes up the stairs, one comes down the stairs, Allah sends Malakul Maut and He takes both of their souls. And the oddities that people would be wondering about would be to say that they would imagine that we know the affair of both of these people. We know one of them is going to heaven and one is going somewhere else. And the mistake would be that they would misunderstand who was going where because if they saw the apparent, they didn't see what was changing inside. This is that nafs al-lawwama. This is that self that is working on itself and acknowledging the mistakes that we make and the changes that we have to make. And each of us is going through that phase. The next phase, salawat for the sihat of Mawlana Tilmiz, inshallah. Where he points out, he says, typically there are three that people mention when they describe the nafs and its attributes of growth. He says, but there's a fourth that they miss, which is called nafs al-mulhama. That refers to in the Quran where Allah discusses and He says, وَنَفْسَ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. That soul which has been taught and educated what is right and what is wrong. This is that part of our nafs and our self that as we think and we ponder over things, that we learn to acknowledge what's good and what's bad. And what are the things that Allah would like from us and what are the things that Allah would not like from us. And that we start to prepare ourselves and understand that no matter how good or bad something is, we know what we should be doing. And this actually comes from a hadith of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. A man came to our Holy Prophet and he intended not to ask the Prophet sincerely, but to try and perplex the Prophet. And he sits down to the Prophet and he says, so you promise that you're a prophet of God, then explain to me all the things that are good and all the things that are bad. And he imagines that now this Prophet, how will he sit down and dissect all of society and list all of the rules and go through this process? And he thinks that now I've fooled this man and he won't be able to answer this question. But Rasulullah, in his wisdom and beauty, never made things complicated. He simplified things for society. He looks at this man and points to his chest and he says, anything that your heart agrees to is good, and anything that your heart is unhappy with is bad for you. He says, within your heart, Allah has affixed this affair already. All you need to do is to be conscious of it. You need to work on this effort of acknowledging what is inside of us. And this is where, when we talked about in our first discussion, we talked about that certain actions that Allah has mandated for us, whether we take a look at salat, whether we take a look at siyam, whether we take a look at the ibadat that Allah has mandated upon us, each of them has a responsibility of maintaining this connection between spirit and body. And they strengthen that connection. The more time I spend in my salat, in my Quran, the stronger the spiritual presence within me, the more I give strength to my spirituality to help me acknowledge and appreciate what is good and to stay away from what is bad. That's why one of the explanations, especially that I tell parents, is spend every day reciting Quran with your children. You can't be with your children 24/7. Now when they go back to school, they're not in front of you. How do I ensure that my child isn't doing something wrong? How do I ensure my child isn't doing something bad? I can't be the one to watch him all the time, but what I can do is give him the training and the spiritual presence that he himself has the acknowledgement of what is good and what is bad. He wants to stay away from those things that are bad for him and harmful. Inside of him, he feels that. How is he going to feel that? If he's connected to Allah, he will know what Allah wants from me. If he's disconnected from Allah, he will ask you first, who is Allah? Then tell me what he wants. Don't wait for your children that, when they grow up, they'll understand and they'll learn and then they'll decide themselves if they want. No, they need to first be educated of what is inside themselves. What exists within them, so that they can understand the balance of the scale. The eyes of the heart, this sincerity of the soul, this knowing of what's right and wrong is one of the most powerful abilities that we possess. Al-Imam Majlisi, when he describes this, he says that this knowing of the heart is the most accurate sense that a human being possesses. He says, you see, most of the time people take fakhr, pride in their sight. Those of us who wear glasses, don't worry. But we say that my sight guarantees me, I know when I saw something. But you see, the sight can make a mistake. When I'm going, for example, down the highway, I see something move on the side of the road. Oh, I think it's an animal. No, it was a plastic bag caught in a tree. But if you ask that person 10 times, he'll say, I swear there was something, an animal that was moving there. Meaning the sight of the eyes can make a mistake, but the sight of the heart, the purity of the soul, doesn't make mistakes when it tells you something is good for me and when it tells you to stay away from something that's bad for me. This sense will not make any mistakes. Therefore, it's something that requires refinement and honement. Now, we're okay? Before we get to the final stage of where we want to be, now is the point to discuss how do we grow through these phases. The biggest drawback and barrier that exists within this process that needs to be corrected is ujub. Ujub is pride. This pride that exists within man is your most dangerous enemy and is shaitan's favorite tool. Remember, it's the basis of pride that caused Iblis to fall from the high status in the eyes of Allah. When Allah commanded that when I blow my spirit into this Adam, all of you fall into sajda. Iblis refused to perform sajda. Iblis loves Allah. Iblis has no problem with Allah. He's happy to worship Allah. He has a problem with you and I. He hates us. And when Allah commanded and everyone did sajda except for Iblis, and Allah asks him, مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَسْجُدَ بِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيْهِ? What stopped you that you didn't do sajda to that which I created with my hands? Iblis wasn't being facetious. The pride in him was so great that he really believed it. He said, أَنَا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُ خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَّارٍ وَخَلَقْتُهُ مِن طِينٍ. Shaitan wasn't being facetious. Iblis wasn't being, he really believed. He says, yeah, I'm better than him. You created me of fire. You created him of clay. Fire is better than clay. Why would I do sajda to him? I've accomplished something great with my life. I was a jinn who was a cast out, who was alone on this earth. My worship raised me such that in the heavens, the best of the angels, I'm now on par with them. Why would I lower myself in front of him? So Allah turns to him and he says, فَخْرُجْ مِنْهَا إِنَّكَ رَجِيمٌ. Get out of here, certainly you are accursed. Iblis was hurt. 12,000 years of worship before Allah, and he lost it because of one sajda to a piece of clay. So he says, if this is my flaw, I'm going to take this humanity with me, and what I'm going to show you is that they have just as much pride as I did. Which is why the biggest thing that stops us from changing, acknowledging our mistakes, and becoming a better person is this concept of pride. And it requires riyadha, it requires training to overcome this pride. It requires effort and exercise of admitting when you don't know something. It requires effort and exercise of asking for help and assistance, and even when we have the fear that we'll look foolish if we ask such a question. It happens. We get older. We are supposed to know things. We may not know them. We feel we need to ask a question. Who do we ask? How can I ask so-and-so? How can they know I don't know? We imagine that this world is looking at us and our pride stands in our way. That how could I not know this? How could I need help with this? How could I have this discussion? And this pride gets in our way. There's a story. You guys are good with the story? Yeah? Okay. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Sallu ala of a teacher who used to teach a class of spirituality. And he would work on the training of these students that along with the rest of their religious studies, they developed their spiritual self and that they worked on this. And he would sit each one and all of the students, one of the aspects of developing spirituality, especially when you work on it, it's not something you do alone because of the fear of something like pride. because of the fear of our ability for imagination to misguide us. Which is why when you study, for example, spirituality, whether you want to call it irfan, whether you want to call it taqwa, whatever you want to call it, usually there's someone who guides us in the process to understand how this goes. So this teacher, he would take students and he would guide them. Part of the guiding them was that he would give each of them individual homework assignments on a regular basis, so that each individual, wherever they were in their development, he would work on their characteristics to improve their behavior. One day, a new student came and said, I want to attend this class. And it happened that this student, this young man, was from the wealthiest, most prosperous, well-known family of the city. And he comes to the Sheikh and he sits in front of the Sheikh and he says, Sheikh, I want to take this class. I want to develop myself. I want to develop my spiritual presence. I want to learn. The Sheikh says, are you sure? It's going to cost you a lot. And this young man says, money is no object. Sheikh says, I didn't say it was money. Young man doesn't realize it. He says, okay, no problem. He sits in the class, he listens to the lectures, he seems interested, he seems excited, and eventually the Sheikh says, it's time to give you your first assignment. The young man says, yeah, I'll take my first assignment. The Sheikh says, I want you to go into the market to where the butchers are. And I want you to buy from them the lung, the spleen, the heart, the tongue of a cow. Now, if you know anything about cows, it's big organs. The guy says, no problem, I can have my servants go take care of it now. The Sheikh goes, no. You have to buy it yourself, and you have to carry it on your back and bring it back here. And the young man says, nah, do you know who I am? I'm from like the best family in town. How could I do something so disgraceful? My servants do this type of work for me. The Sheikh says, you want to be in my class? He says, yes. So I can go to the market and buy it. But people will look at me. What will people think? The Sheikh says, do you want to be in the class? He says, yes. He says, then go. This young man slinks through the market, trying to hide himself and hide his face. Eventually goes to the butcher and like covers his face. Can you sell me? Yeah. And buys this stuff. And now comes the hard part, that he has to carry it. He says, when I'm carrying it, and listen, the lungs of a cow, the spleen, these parts of a cow are heavy. Cows are big. Carrying it on his back is going to take effort. How is he going to hide himself? And he makes the decision, the class is more important to me than what anybody thinks of me. And he says, fine. So he puts this on his back and he walks through the middle of the market and comes back to his teacher. And the teacher says, how did you do? He says, I did it. It was disgraceful, but I did it. I don't know why you're making me do this, but I did it. He says, the teacher asked him, did anyone see you? He said, of course. He said, thousands of people will swear that they saw me. Sheikh says, okay, no problem. He says, now I want you to take these things, take all these parts, go down to the river, wash them so that we can cook them. And this is where the student says, that's it. I'm done. Sheikh says, what's wrong? He says, these acts are not of my caliber. Do you know who I am? Sheikh says, I'm saying I know who you are. That's why I'm telling you to do this. The young man says, okay, I trust you. He takes the organs, takes them down to the river. Now imagine, what do you have to do when you get in a river? He asks